Hey everyone, welcome back to Corporate Decoder, the place where we unpack the confusing stuff so you don't have to. Tonight, we have a massive shareholder report from Vanguard Chester Funds. And boy, is it a doozy. Think of it like a financial yearbook for over a dozen mutual funds. It might sound dry, but buried in all these numbers are the stories of how your money has been working. For you, this report covers a full year from October 2024 to September 2025, and it lays out the financial health and performance of some of Vanguard's most popular retirement funds. If you appreciate getting straight insights from corporate documents, make sure you're subscribed, and remember we have a Discord community linked in the description below where we break down these filings even further. Alright, so Vanguard Chester Funds is essentially the parent company for a whole bunch of Vanguard mutual funds in this filing. We are looking at a bunch of target retirement funds. These are really popular because they are designed to automatically adjust your investment mix. As you get closer to retirement, they start more aggressive with stocks and then slowly shift to more cons. Over to bonds over time, the really interesting part of this report is diving into the financial performance of each of these funds. It's like getting a detailed report card for each one. Let's start with the Vanguard Target Retirement Income. This fund is designed for people who are already in retirement or very close to it. It's all about generating income and preserving capital. So how did it do over the past year from October 24 to September 2025? First off, let's talk about costs for a hypothetical $10,000 investment in Investor. Shares you would have paid just $8, that is a minuscule. 0.08%, this low cost is a hallmark of Vanguard funds, and a big reason why so many people choose them. It means more of your money stays invested and working for you. Performance-wise, the fund did pretty much in line with its benchmark for the year. The report mentions market optimism about deregulation, tax cuts, and artificial intelligence, but also concerns about rising interest rates and stretched valuations. It notes the Federal Reserve resumed cutting short term interest rates in September 2025 after a pause in December 2024. So it seems like a bit of a mixed bag for the markets overall. The fund itself, a fund of funds, gets its performance from its underlying holdings, which range from a modest 2.56% return for Vanguard Total International Bond D Index Fund institutional shares to a much stronger 17.36% for Vanguard Total Stock Market Index Fund institutional plus shares. Looking back over the past decade from September 2015 to September 2025, the investor shares of the income fund returned an average of 5.29% annually. Its benchmark, the Target Retirement Income Composite Index, did a little better at 5.51%. The Bloomberg US Aggregate Bond Index, a measure of the bond market, offered a much lower 1.84% return on average over that same 10-year period. This shows that while bonds are considered safer, they generally offer lower returns than equities over the long run. Some key stats for the income fund as of the 30th of September 2025 show it had a massive $36.2 billion in net assets. Its portfolio is diversified across 8 main holdings. And importantly, the portfolio turnover rate was just 7%, meaning they are not actively trading in and out of positions, which is typical for index funds. DS and helps keep costs down, the total investment advisory fees. A big fat zero, that is because these are index funds and Vanguard has structured them. So those fees are essentially absorbed by the underlying funds. Digging into what the income fund actually invests in, the largest piece, 36.3%, is in the Vanguard Total Bond Market 2 Index Fund. Investor shares next up is the Vanguard Total Stock Market Index Fund, institutional plus shares at 18.5%, followed by Vanguard Short-Term Inflation. Protected Securities Index Fund, Admiral shares at 16.2%, and Vanguard Total International Bond, the second index fund, institutional shares at 15.4%. It also holds Vanguard Total International Stock Index Fund investor shares at 12.9%. This breakdown clearly shows it's a balanced approach, leaning a bit more towards bonds given its purpose for retirees. Now let's look at the Vanguard Target Retirement 2020 Fund. This fund is for those who are planning to retire around the year 2020, and by now it's already shifted to a very conservative allocation as its target date passed. Just like the income fund, the costs here are incredibly low for a $10,000 investment. It was only $8 or 0.08% super efficient. Performance was also in line with its benchmark for the year. The market commentary about optimism and concerns remains the same. And the underlying holdings again range from 2.56% to 17.36%. For this fund, it automatically adjusts its asset mix over time, getting more conservative as its target date passes. This is a key feature of target date funds. Over the past decade, from September 2015 to September 2025, the 2020 fund investor shares returned a solid 6.99% average annually. Its benchmark, the Target Retirement 2020 Composite Index, slightly outperformed at 7.26%. The MSCI US Broad Market Index, a pure stock market benchmark, trounced both with a 14.7%. 9% average annual return, but remember this fund is much more conservative now than that broad market index. The 2020 fund is substantial with $35.6 billion in net assets. It holds 8 main positions and had a portfolio turnover rate of 8%. Again, zero investment advisory fees, reported it's a fund of funds structure. The portfolio composition for the 2020 fund shows a significant allocation to bonds, 34.4% in Vanguard Total Bond Market 2 Index Fund, investor shares, and then 21.6% in Vanguard Total Stock Market Index Fund, institutional plus shares, followed by international stock and international bond funds at 14.9 and 14.9 and 14.5% respectively. And Vanguard Short. Term inflation, protected securities index fund Admiral shares at 13.9%, clearly shifting towards income generation and capital preservation as expected. Moving on to the Vanguard Target Retirement 2025 fund for those planning to retire around 2025. The costs are consistently low, and $8 expense for a $10,000 investment, or 0.08%. Performance was in line with its benchmark. Again, the market commentary is identical, and the underlying fund returns are the same range as with other target date funds. It automatically adjusts its asset mix, decreasing stocks and increasing bonds. Over the last 10 years, the 2025 fund investor shares returned an average of 7.99% annually. Its benchmark, the Target Retirement 2025 Composite Index, also performed well at 8.31%. The broad stock market index, however, stands out with that 14.79% average annual return, illustrating the growth potential of stocks over longer periods. This fund is quite large with $76.7 billion in net assets. It holds 8 underlying funds with an 8% turnover rate, and again, no direct investment advisory fees. The structure is designed for efficiency. The portfolio for the 2025 fund shows 30.1% in Vanguard Total Stock Market Index Fund Institutional plus shares, and 28.8% in Vanguard Total Bond Market 2 Index Fund. Investor shares with international stock and bond funds filling out the next largest portions. This fund clearly still holds a significant portion in stocks, but is also building a substantial bond allo. Cash in. Next up is the Vanguard Target Retirement 2030 Fund. Your costs remain incredibly low, a mere $8 for a $10,000 investment, or 0.08%. Performance was in line with its benchmark. The fund continues its automatic asset mix adjustment, decreasing stock exposure and increasing bond holdings. Over the last decade, the 2030 fund investor shares delivered an average annual return of 8.78%, its benchmark. The Target Retirement 2030 Composite Index was slightly higher at 9.11%. This is a massive fund with $106.6 billion in net assets. It holds 8 underlying funds with a 9% turnover rate and 0 direct advisory fees. The 2030 fund has a significant 36.1% in Vanguard Total Stock Market Index Fund Institutional Plus shares and 27.2% in Vanguard Total Bond Market 2 Index Fund. Investor shares, it has a notably higher allocation to international stock at 24.7% compared to previous funds. Now for the Vanguard Target Retirement 2035 Fund. The cost remains unchanged at $8 for a $10,000 investment, or 0.08%. Performance was roughly in line with its benchmark. The market conditions are the same, with the fund's asset mix continuing to shift. Over the past decade, the 2035 fund investor shares Avenue averaged a strong 9.55% return annually, its benchmark. The Target Retirement 2035 Composite Index returned 9.87%. This fund is substantial with $116.3 billion in net assets. It holds 7 underlying funds with a 6% turnover rate, showing a slightly more hands-off approach than some earlier funds. The portfolio here shows 41% in Vanguard Total Stock Market Index Fund Institutional Plus shares and 27.6% in Vanguard Total International Stock Index Fund. Investor shares, the bond allocation is decreasing with Vanguard Total Bond Market 2 Index Fund investor shares at 21.8% and International Bond at 9%. This fund is clearly still leaning towards growth with a very large stock allocation. Let's check in on the Vanguard Target Retirement 2040 Fund. Costs remain at $8 for a $10,000 investment, or 0.08%. Performance was roughly in line with its benchmark. The fund continues its strategy of automatically adjusting its asset mix. Over the past 10 years, the 2040 fund investor shares achieved an average annual return of 10.3%. Its benchmark, the Target Retirement 2040 Composite Index, was slightly higher at 10.61%, demonstrating that even for funds with more conservative allocations in the past, the stock market has delivered strong long-term growth. This fund is massive with $105.9 billion in net assets. It has 7 underlying holdings and a low 5% turnover rate, reflecting its index-driven strategy. The portfolio composition shows a significant 45.6% in Vanguard Total Stock Market Index Fund Institutional Plus shares and 30.6% in Vanguard Total International Stock Index Fund. Investor shares bond allocations are smaller, with Total Bond Market 2 at 16.5% and International Bond at 6.7%. This is a portfolio geared towards growth with a strong emphasis on equities. Now let's look at the Vanguard Target Retirement 2045 Fund. The cost stays at $8 for a $10,000 investment, or 0.08%. Performance was roughly in line with its benchmark. The fund continues its glide path, reducing stock exposure and increasing bond exposure. Over the past decade, the 2045 fund investor shares returned an average annual 10.89%, its benchmark. The Target Retirement 2045 Composite Index returned 11.21%. This fund has $105.5 billion in net assets. It holds 7 underlying funds and a very low 4% turnover rate. The portfolio composition for the 2045 fund is 49.7% in Vanguard Total Stock Market Index Fund, Institutional Plus shares, and 33.8% in Vanguard Total International Stock Index Fund. Investor shares the bond allocation is further reduced, with Total Bond Market 2 at 11.4% and International Bond at 4.5%. This fund is heavily weighted towards stock, reflecting its longer time horizon before retirement. Let's move on to the Vanguard Target Retirement 2050 Fund. Costs are still a very efficient $8 for a $10,000 investment, or 0.08%. Performance was in line with its benchmark. The fund continues its automatic asset allocation adjustments. Over the past 10 years, this is where things get really interesting. The 2050 fund investor shares returned an average of 11.16% annually, its benchmark. The Target Retirement 2050 Composite Index performed slightly better at 11.50%. This fund has $92.3 billion in net assets. It holds 7 underlying funds and a very low 2% turnover rate. The portfolio is heavily skewed towards stocks, 54.4% in Vanguard Total Stock Market Index Fund Institutional Plus shares and 36.8% in Vanguard Total International Stock Index Fund. Investor shares the bond allocations are minimal at 5.8% for Total Bond Market 2 and 2.4% for International Bond. This strategy is designed for maximum growth over the long term. Next is the Vanguard Target Retirement 2055 Fund. Costs remain at $8 for a $10,000 investment, or 0.08%. Performance was in line with its benchmark. Market conditions are consistent and the fund continues its glide path. Over the past decade, the 2055 fund investor shares returned an average of 11.15%. Annually, its benchmark, the Target Retirement 2055 Composite Index, was slightly higher at 11.50%. This fund has $64 billion in net assets. It holds 7 underlying funds and a minimal 2% turnover rate. The portfolio composition is 54.4% Vanguard Total Stock Market Index Fund Institutional Plus shares and 37.1% Vanguard Total International Stock Index Fund. Investor shares bond allocations are again very small, 5.5% for Total Bond Market T and 2.4% for International Bond. This aggressive growth stance is expected for a fund like this. Now we check on the Vanguard Target Retirement 2060 Fund. Your costs are still an incredibly low $8 for a $10,000 investment, or 0.08%. Performance was in line with its benchmark. The fund continues its gradual shift away from stocks toward bonds. Over the past 10 years, the 2060 fund investor shares returned an average of 11.15% annually, its benchmark. The Target Retirement 2060 Composite Index was slightly higher at 11.50%. The fund has $37.9 billion in net assets. It holds 7 underlying funds and a minimal 1% turnover rate. The portfolio composition mirrors the 2055 fund, with 54.4% in Vanguard Total Stock Market Index Fund Institutional Plus shares and 37.1% in Vanguard Total International Stock Index Fund. Investor shares bond allocations are similarly small, 5.5% for Total Bond Market IT and 2.4% for International Bond. This is a very growth-oriented portfolio. Let's look at the Vanguard Target Retirement 2065 Fund. This is a newer fund, so the 10-year performance data isn't as extensive. Costs remain at $8 for a $10,000 investment, or 0.08%. Performance was in line with its benchmark. The fund is actively managed towards its target date. Since its inception on the 12th of July 2017 through the 30th of September 2025, The investor shares returned an average of 10.55% annually. Its benchmark, the Target Retirement 2065 Composite Index, did a bit better at 10.90%. This fund has $12.7 billion in net assets. It holds 7 underlying funds with a very low 1% turnover rate, reflecting its passive investment strategy. The portfolio composition is 54.5% Vanguard Total Stock Market Index Fund Institutional Plus Shares and 37.1% Vanguard Total International Stock Index Fund. Investor shares bond allocations are minimal 5.5% for Total Bond Market 2 and 2.4% for International Bond. Again, this shows a heavy tilt towards equities. Finally, we have the Vanguard Target Retirement 2070 Fund. This is the youngest fund in this group. Costs are still a very low $8 for a 10,000 investment, or 0.08%. Performance was in line with its benchmark. The fund follows its strategic asset allocation adjustments. Since its inception on the 28th of June 2022 through the 30th of September 2025, the investor shares returned an average of 16.39% annually. Its benchmark, the Target Retirement 2070 Composite Index, was slightly higher at 16.53%. This fund is smaller with $2.09 billion in net assets. It holds 7 underlying funds with a 3% turnover rate. The portfolio composition for the 2070 fund is 54.5% Vanguard Total Stock Market Index Fund Institutional Plus Shares and 37.0% Vanguard Total International Stock Index Fund. Investor shares bond allocations are minimal 5.5% for Total Bond Market 2 and 2.4% for International Bond. This is a very growth focused fund appropriate for people with a very long time horizon. Now, beyond the fund performance, the report also covers some corporate governance details. Vanguard Chester Funds has a code of ethics in place for its top executives, and it was updated slightly during the year for minor technical changes. Nothing major to report there. When it comes to overseeing the financial health and integrity of these funds, the Audit and Risk Committee members Sarah Bloom Raskin, Peter F. Volanakis Tara Bunch, and Mark Luffridge are all considered financial experts. And importantly, they are independent, meaning they have no business ties to Vanguard that could influence. Hence their judgment. Looking at auditor fees for the fiscal year ending the 30th of September 2025, the audit fees were $28,000, a decrease from $32,000 in the previous year. There were no audit-related tax or other fees charged directly to the registrant company itself. However, when you look further down the report at the non-audit fees billed to the broader Vanguard complex, including other investment companies and Vanguard Marketing Corporation, the numbers are much larger for the year ending the 30th of September 2025. These fees totaled $5.6 million. This breaks down into $3.8 million for audit. Related services $1.7 million for tax services and $25,000 for all other services. These are significant sums, but given the massive scale of Vanguard's operations, it is not entirely unexpected. The audit committee did confirm these non-audit services were consistent with maintaining the auditor's independence. Now let's get into the nitty-gritty, the actual financial statements for the year ending the 30th of September 2025. We are going to focus on the Target Retirement Income Fund here, as it was on page 1 of the financial sections, and gives us a good overview of the fund's operations. This schedule of investments is where we see exactly what the income fund is holding. It's almost entirely invested in other Vanguard funds, a common strategy for target date funds. The largest holding by far is Vanguard Total Bond Market 2 Index Fund. Investor shares making up 52.5% of the portfolio. This is followed by Vanguard Total Stock Market Index Fund Institutional Plus shares at 18.5% Vanguard Short-Term Inflation, Protected Securities Index Fund Admiral shares at 16.2%, and Vanguard Total International Bond Desk Key Index Fund Institutional shares at 15.4%. It is a very bond-heavy allocation as expected for a retirement income fund. The statement of assets and liabilities shows the fund has $36.2 billion in net assets. The investments themselves are valued at over $36 billion. Cash collateral pledged for futures contracts is around $10.6 million. Payables for investment securities purchased and redeemed are also noted the net asset value. Per share for the income fund at the end of the period was $14.06. The statement of operations tells us how the fund made and lost money income distributions received from affiliated funds were over $1.1 billion. Realized net gains were substantial as well at almost $690 million, with changes in unrealized appreciation, adding another $825 million to the net assets. All in all, the net increase in net assets from operations was over $2.6 billion. billion. Looking at the statement of changes in net assets, we see that for the year ending the 30th of September 2025, the fund had a net decrease of $311 million total distributions. Paid out were over $2 billion, while capital share transactions resulted in a net decrease as well. This means more money was withdrawn from the fund than was put in through share purchases during this specific year. The financial highlights give us a snapshot of per share performance over the past year. The net asset value per S-share increased from $13.83 to $14.06. The total return for the year was 7.89%. This is a solid return consistent with the fund's objective of providing income and some growth. The notes to the financial statements are where we find the really important details about how everything works. For example, Note A explains their security valuation policy investments are valued at the net asset value of each underlying Vanguard fund, determined at the close of the New York Stock Exchange. This is standard for mutual funds. Note B discusses Vanguard service agreement and CLAR. Advise why investment advisory fees are zero for these funds because the costs are borne by the underlying funds. This is a key aspect of Vanguard's low-cost model. Now we jump over to the Target Retirement 2020 fund and its financials as of the 30th of September 2025. This fund had $35.6 billion in net assets. Its portfolio is also heavily weighted towards bonds, with Vanguard Total Bond Market 2 Index Fund, investor shares at 34.4%, and Vanguard Total Stock Market Index Fund Institutional Plus shares at a substantial 21.6%. The net asset value per S-share for the 2020 fund was $29.22. The statement of operations for the 2020 fund shows its net investment income distributions received from affiliated funds were over $1.1 billion combined with realized and unrealized gains. The net increase in net assets from operations was nearly $2.9 billion. Interestingly, for the year ending the 30th of September 2025, the 2020 fund experienced a net decrease in assets of over $2.2 billion. Total distributions were around $3 billion, and capital share transactions also saw a net outflow. This suggests investors were withdrawing more than investing in this particular year, likely due to people retiring and taking distributions. The financial highlights for the 2020 fund show a total return of 8.59% for the year with a net asset value per S-share of $29.22. This is a positive performance given its more conservative allocation. Moving to the Target Retirement 2025 fund, this massive fund had $76.7 billion in net assets as of the 30th of September 2025. Its portfolio composition is shifting more towards stocks compared to the 2020 fund, with Vanguard Total Stock Market Index Fund Institutional Plus shares at 30.1% and Vanguard Total Bond Market 2 Index Fund investor shares at 28.8%. The net asset value per S-share was $21.00. The 2025 fund generated over $7.4 billion in net increase from operations, driven by strong investment income and significant realized and unrealized gains. This fund is still in a growth phase. This fund saw a net decrease in assets of over $2 billion for the year ending the 30th of September 2025. Total distributions were over $5.3 billion, outpacing capital share issuances. This indicates investors are starting to take distributions from this fund as it gets closer to its target date. The financial highlights for the 2025 fund show a total return of 10.52% for the year with a net asset value per S-share of $21.00. This is a healthy return for a fund balancing growth with increasing conservatism. Looking at the Target Retirement 2030 fund with $106.6 billion in net assets as of the 30th of September 2025. This is one of Vanguard's largest funds. Its portfolio is now heavily weighted towards stocks, with 36.1% in Vanguard Total Stock Market Index Fund, Institutional Plus shares, and 24.7% in Vanguard Total International Stock Index Fund. Investor shares, the net asset value per S-share was $43.04. Operations for the 2030 fund were incredibly strong, with a net increase in net assets of over $11.2 billion. This reflects its significant allocation to equities benefiting from market growth. For the year ending the 30th of September 2025, the 2030 fund saw a net increase in assets of over $7.5 billion. This fund is still in its growth phase, with more capital coming in than being distributed, demonstrating continued investor confidence as the target date approaches. The financial highlights show a total return of 11.70% for the year with a net asset value per S-share of $43.04. This is a very strong performance for a diversified fund. Next, let's check in on the Vanguard Target Retirement 2030 2045 fund with $116.3 billion in net assets as of the 30th of September 2025. This fund is also heavily weighted towards stocks with 41% in Vanguard Total Stock Market Index Fund Institutional Plus Shares and 27.6% in Vanguard Total International Stock Index. Fund investor shares the net asset value per S-Hair was $27.50. Operations for the 2035 fund generated a net increase in net assets of over $13.2 billion. This growth is driven by a large equity allocation. For the year ending the 30th of September 2025, the 2035 fund saw a significant net increase in assets of over $12.1 billion. This shows robust growth as the fund continues to be a primary investment vehicle for individuals with many years until retirement. The financial highlights for the 2035 fund show a total return of 12.84% for the year with a net asset value per S-Hair of $27.50. This strong return reflects the benefit of a still substantial equity allocation. We now look at the Vanguard Target Retirement 2040 Fund with $105.9 billion in net assets as of the 30th of September 2025. The portfolio is 45.6% in Vanguard Total Stock Market Index Fund Institutional Plus Shares and 30.6% in Vanguard Total International Stock Index Fund. Investor shares the net as set value per S-Hair was $49.98. Operations for the 2040 fund resulted in over $12.9 billion net increase in assets, this year showing continued strong performance from its equity holdings. For the year ending the 30th of September 2025, the 2040 fund experienced a healthy net increase in assets of over $12.7 billion, again indicating sustained growth and investor inflows. The financial highlights for the 2040 fund report a total return of 13.90% for the year with a net asset value per S-Hair of $49.98. These represent very strong results from this fund. Let's examine the Vanguard Target Retirement 2045 fund with $105.5 billion in net assets as of the 30th of September 2025. This fund is now heavily invested in stocks with 49.7% in Vanguard Total Stock Market Index Fund, Institutional Plus Shares, and 33.8% in Vanguard Total International. Stock Index Fund investor shares the net asset value per S-Hair was $34.61. The operations for the 2045 fund resulted in a net increase of over $13.7 billion. This is the highest net increase from operations among the funds we have seen so far, reflecting its significant stock allocation. For the year ending the 30th of September 2025, the 2045 fund saw a robust net increase in assets of over $14.5 billion. This is a testament to its continued attractiveness for long-term investors in the growth phase. The financial highlights show a total return of 14.94% this year with a net asset value per S-Hair of $34.61. These numbers indicate strong positive performance. Now we look at the Vanguard Target Retirement 2050 Fund with $92.3 billion in net assets as of the 30th of September 2025. It is now predominantly invested in stocks with 54.4% in Vanguard Total Stock Market Index Fund, Institutional Plus Shares, and 36.8% in Vanguard Total International Stock Index Fund. NV Store shares the net asset value per S-Hair was $58.72. The 2050 fund's operations produced a net increase of over $12.7 billion. This fund is following a strong growth trajectory. For the year ending the 30th of September 2025, the 2050 fund achieved an impressive net increase in assets of over $14.9 billion. This level of increase shows strong investor interest and positive market performance. The financial highlights report a total return of 16.08% this year with a net asset value per S-Hair of $58.72. These are excellent results for this fund. Next up is the Vanguard Target Retirement 2055 Fund with $64 billion in net assets as of the 30th of September 2025. Its holdings are 54.4% in Vanguard Total Stock Market Index Fund, Institutional Plus Shares, and 37.1% in Vanguard Total International Stock Index Fund. Investor shares the net asset value per S-Hair was $65.52. Operations for the 2055 fund generated a net increase of over $8.8 billion. This reflects its highly growth-oriented strategy. For the year ending the 30th of September 2025, the 2055 fund saw a significant net increase in assets of over $12 billion. This strongly positive growth indicates continued investor trust in Vanguard's long-term approach. The financial highlights show a total return of 16.07% this year with a net asset value per S-Hair of $65.52. These strong returns are consistent with a high equity allocation. Let's look at the Vanguard Target Retirement 2060 Fund with $37.9 billion in net assets as of the 30th of September 2025. Its portfolio is 54.4% Vanguard Total Stock Market Index Fund, institutional plus shares, and 37.1% Vanguard Total International Stock Index Fund. Investor shares the net asset value per share was $60.38. Operations for the 2060 fund resulted in a net increase of over $5.1 billion. This growth is attributable to its substantial stock holdings. For the year ending the 30th of September 2025, the 2060 fund experienced a substantial net increase in assets of over $8.4 billion. This growth highlights its appeal for investors with a very long time horizon. The financial highlights report a strong total return of 16.05% this year with a net asset value per share of $60.38. These results are impressive for a fund optimized for long-term growth. We now move to the Vanguard Target Retirement 2065 Fund with $12.7 billion in net assets as of the 30th of September 2025. Its investments are heavily tilted towards stocks, 54.5% in Vanguard Total Stock Market Index Fund Institutional Plus Shares, and 37.1% in Vanguard Total International Stock Index Fund. Investor shares the net asset value per share was $39.61. Operations for the 2065 fund delivered a net increase of over $1.7 billion. This is a solid performance driven by its equity focus. For the year ending the 30th of September 2025, the 2065 fund saw a significant net increase in assets of over $3.9 billion. This growth continues to show the fund attracting new investment consistent with its long-term focus. The financial highlights show a total return of 16.02% this year with a net asset value per share of $39.61. These are strong returns for this relatively newer fund. Lastly, let's look at the Vanguard Target Retirement 2070 Fund with $2.09 billion in net assets as of the 30th of September 2025. Its portfolio is 54.5% Vanguard Total Stock Market Index Fund, institutional plus shares, and 37.0% Vanguard Total International Stock Index Fund. At value per share was $31.43. Operations for the 2070 fund contributed a net increase of over $262 million. This performance is driven by its equity holdings. For the year ending the 30th of September 2025, the 2070 fund experienced a substantial net increase in assets of over $1 billion. This aggressive growth is characteristic of new funds attracting significant investment inflows. The financial highlights report a total return of 16.00% this year with a net asset value per share of $31.43. These strong short-term returns for this new fund are promising. But as always, past performance is not indicative of future results. So what does this all mean? Vanguard Chester Funds and its various target retirement funds reported fair financial statements for the periods ending the 30th of September 2025. This sounds standard, but it means that PricewaterhouseCoopers LLP, an independent accounting firm, has reviewed everything and they believe the numbers are accurate and presented correctly according to accounting prin. Cyples in the US, this gives investors confidence that the financial reporting is reliable. The tax information section may seem a bit technical, but it provides crucial details for investors filing their taxes. For example, it tells you what portion of your ordinary income from these funds can qualify for tax deductions or be taxed at lower rates. It also breaks down the amounts designated as qualified dividend income and interest earned from US government obligations, which is generally exempt from state income tax. These details can impact your tax liability significantly. Overall, Vanguard Chester Funds continues to demonstrate its core strength, low costs, and broad diversification across its target retirement funds. The strategy of using underlying index funds is incredibly efficient and translates into minimal fees for investors. This is a huge plus for long-term investors as fees can significantly erode returns over time. The funds are clearly designed with a long-term perspective, shifting asset allocation appropriately. As target dates approach, the main strength is the inherent diversification and passive management strategy, which generally leads to solid long-term performance with managed risk. One notable risk inherent in these funds is their reliance on market performance, as seen in the financial highlights. Market downturns can lead to negative returns, which is a risk for all equity investments, particularly for funds that are still heavily weighted in stocks. For the funds closer to retirement, income generation becomes a more critical metric. The main opportunity remains Guard's ability to offer these diversified portfolios at extremely low costs, allowing more of the investors' money to compound over time. In conclusion, these Vanguard target retirement funds continue to offer a robust and cost-effective way for investors to manage their retirement savings. The financial reporting is clean, the performance is generally in line with benchmarks, and the structure is built for efficiency, while market fluctuations are always a risk the long-term strategy embedded in. These funds aims to mitigate that through diversification and automatic rebalancing. The main takeaway is that for long-term retirement planning, these funds provide a reliable and sensible approach. Anything notable? While the sheer scale of these funds is remarkable, with some holding over $100 billion in net assets, this sheer size and Vanguard's operational efficiency means they can offer these products at such low cost it's a powerful combination for the average investor. Alright, that is our breakdown of Vanguard's latest filing. What is your take on these numbers and what they signal for the company's future drop? Your thoughts in the comments. If this analysis was valuable, hitting that like button really helps, and subscribe for more deep dives. Don't forget to check out the Discord in the description. Thanks for watching. See you next time.